Chapter 13 of the Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan. The Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge by Herbert Carter. Chapter 13. Baiting Old Phin, the Moonshiner. Thad himself managed to retain his self-possession under these trying conditions. What he believed he had to fear most of all was that one of his chums might give the secret away by some ill-advised remark uttered under the spur of the moment. He knew that they must have shrunk back appalled when the moonshiner made such a threatening move, accompanied by his fierce words. But for the life of him, Thad could not tear his eyes away from the face of the man himself. It was just as well Phin Dady looked Thad as the leader of the scouts for an answer to his demand. Had the boy shown any evidence of confusion or weakening just then, it might have confirmed the sudden ugly suspicions that had flashed into the other's mind. And just when he was growing more or less interested in the wonderful stories he had been listening to concerning the aims and ambitions of these uniformed lads. "There are 8 of us, just as you say," Thad remarked, trying to look surprised at the change of front on the part of his caller. "But the other one, White is his name, has gone to see Reuben Sparks on business. We expect him back inside of an hour or so. If you'd care to wait, you can meet him." His air was so candid, his face so free from guile, that the moonshiner could find no further cause for suspicion. Besides, he had not heard in the beginning that the scouts had already made the acquaintance of Reuben Sparks, like himself, had displayed more or less interest in their aims and ambitions. Phin Dady even began to feel a little ashamed of his sudden threatening attitude. The fierce look on his thin face, that, with its gleaming wolfish eyes, had made him appear so savage, gradually vanished. It gave way to a rather stupid grin, as though the man realized how silly it was of him to suspect that these half-grown boys could do injury to one who for years had defied all the forces of the United States government. "So that's it, younker, is it?" he said. "Well, I'm glad you explained that thing right off the reel. Of course, Mr. Sparks, he's interested in boys, been a father of any himself, and he invited your pal over to see him, did he? So, did I tell him a heap more?" "Yes, he was very interested and taken with the idea, and showed it by asking a great many questions," Thad went on, trying to keep within the lines of truth, and yet allow the other to draw his own conclusions, to the effect that Reuben had given one of the patrol a pressing invitation to call upon him, and continued the interesting recital of the Boy Scouts' ambitions. "You were saying right now that these here boys ain't nothing expecting to be soldiers, and they don't carry arms. Is that a fact?" When the mountaineer made this remark, he was looking straight toward the tree against which rested the shotgun. Evidently he was a little in doubt concerning the truth of what the patrol leader had said. Or it may have been, wise old Phin was desirous of learning just what he and his followers would have to go up against if ever they attacked the camp of the invaders. Thad laughed good-naturedly. "Oh, that's the only firearm in camp just at present," he declared. "Belongs to me, you see. When we knew there would be little or no hunting on this trip, as the season for protection in North Carolina is on, but not wanting to be without some sort of arms, it was decided just to carry one shotgun. Later on, we expect some time up in Maine, and then it'll be all right for us to carry rifles for big game shooting. One of our members comes from Maine and knows all about it up in that region." Thad talked at length because he saw that somehow the sound of his voice to have a soothing effect on the rough mountaineer. Evidently, Phin Dady had taken more or less a fancy to the leader of the scouts. He had known many boys in his day, and perhaps had one or two of his own, but they were like bear cubs in comparison with this frank-faced youth, with a winning smile and a whole dictionary of words at the tip of his tongue. But now the balance of the boys had managed to recover from their fright. They even began to show an interest in conversation, though not venturing to say a word unless Thad appealed directly to one of them. as he did occasionally to corroborate something he had declared. It was a scene that would none of them be apt to forget in a long time. This untamed old mountaineer, sitting there by their campfire, asking questions in connection with a subject that had aroused his keenest curiosity, while they lounged around, listening and drinking in what he said. Would he never go? Had he then determined to wait for the return of the 8th scout? Perhaps he suspected already the identity of Bob Quail. This was a matter that gave Thad considerable concern, for it meant immediate trouble for their comrade, since the moonshiner might have his old-time enmity for the Quail family revived, under the impression that Bob's coming meant danger for himself. Once Allan arose and stepped outside the circle of the firelight, the mountaineer eyed him with just a trifle of the old suspicion apparently rising again. For Thad could see a nervous twitch to the brown hands that caressed the stock of his repeating rifle. But if this were so, Phin Dady must have realized that he could have little or nothing to fear from one stripling of that species. Immediately relapsed into his former careless attitude. Thad could give a pretty good guess what it was that caused Allan to walk beyond the camp, toward the place from which they had earlier in the evening watched the lights appear in the home of Reuben Sparks, as well as a few more humble cabins across the little valley. Before Bob went away, he arranged a series of flash signals, by means of which he could communicate with his comrades on the patrol. They would not have been true Boy Scouts if they had not before learned how to wig-wag with flags or lanterns, as well as use a looking-glass in the sun and heliograph telegraphy. And so Allan, desirous of ascertaining whether all went well with their absent chum, was now starting out, lantern in hand, to learn whether he could get in communication with Bob. Possibly some of Phin's followers might be in hiding close by, and witnessed these maneuvers with astonishment, not unmixed with suspicion. Thad concluded that it would be best to take the bull by the horns. If he confided in old Phin, the other was apt to discount the news when told by his men. "You remember that I told you," he remarked, "how Boy Scouts are taught to send messages by waving flags, just as they do in real armies, and at night time by means of lighted lanterns? Well, we never lose a chance to practice. And the boy you saw just go out now arranged to talk with one who is across the valley." "Huh!" grunted the old moonshiner, and from that Thad concluded that he allayed any suspicions that might have arisen in his mind. "If you care to see how it's done, why, we can walk out and watch the scout who has the lantern," the patrol leader went on to say, though secretly hoping old Phin may not be interested enough to disturb himself. Sometimes a bold move serves better than extreme caution. Seemed so in this case, at least, for the moonshiner, after making a slight move as though to get up, appeared to think better of it, for he settled back down. "I can understand just about how it's done, younker," he said. "Now, tell me some more about how you learned that thar thing of saving a pal that's been nigh drowned, or else cutting an artery in his leg with an axe. I reckon now that's about the neatest trick I done ever heard." Being brimful of the subject, which always appealed to him more than he could tell, the young patrol leader immediately launched out into a description of the matters that seemed to have deeply interested even this rough old mountaineer. Then he went a step further and told how the scouts entered into the most amusing as well as profitable competitions among themselves. He described a water boiling test, where those in competition are given just 3 matches, and with an empty tin pail in hand, started a signal to see which one can build his fire, fill his tin vessel at least 2/3 full of water, and have this actually boiling. Perhaps the old moonshiner never spent a more interesting hour or so than by the campfire of the Boy Scouts. At any rate, he certainly could not look back to one that must have been more profitable to him in every way. Finally he arose as if to go, and about the same time Allan returned with a lighted lantern in his hand. "Did you get him?" asked old Phin, with some show of eagerness. "Yes, we held quite a little talk, and I guess he must have used up a handful of matches, telling me a pleasant time he had. Right now he's on his way to camp, and he ought to get here inside of an hour." Allan said this as though there could not be anything to conceal. He took a leaf from the example set by Thad. The latter knew that in all probability there had been more to the wigwag talk than Allan chose to state, but he was willing to wait until a more propitious time to hear it. Taken in all, he believed that he had come through the operation of baiting Phin Dady much better than anyone could have expected. The old man was interested in what he had heard, and only the fact that he bore a deadly hatred for the family of young Bob Quail, they would have little to fear from the king of the Moonshiners, whose influence among the other mountaineers was such that he could easily sway them one way or the other at will. Thad caught a wink when he looked into the face of the Maine boy. It told him that Allan had news to tell, which Bob had sent on ahead, knowing how anxious his chums would be to hear whether he had met with any measure of success or not in his undertaking. When Thad turned around again, he found that old Phin had slipped away, taking advantage of their attention being directed for a minute toward the scout, who had just come into camp with a lantern swinging at his side. And Thad heaved a sigh of genuine relief when he found that this was so. End of chapter 13. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan.